Today, I'd like to welcome Rich Weinstein. Rich earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from Wilkes College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and his Master of Arts in anthropology from Louisiana State University. In February of 1975, he joined the staff of Coastal Environments Incorporated in Baton Rouge as the company's first archaeologist. He is now the vice president and senior archaeologist. Over the years, he has worked on archaeological projects across the Gulf Coast and lower Mississippi Valley. Among these are large-scale excavations at the Rock Levee site, the Lake Providence Mound Center, the Lido Harbor site, and the Guadalupe Bay site. Rich has also served as editor for the newsletter of the Louisiana Archaeological Society and has authored chapters in edited books on early pottery and Gulf Coast archaeology. His articles have appeared in numerous journals such as American Antiquity, Southeastern Archaeology, Plains Anthropologist, and the Bulletin of the Texas Archaeological Society. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rich.
Site 41HM61 is located on both the north and south sides of the current channel of the Leon River, about 10 kilometers north of Hamilton, Texas, at the crossing of the U.S. Highway 281 bridge over the river. Research at the site was driven by the need for the Texas Department of Transportation, TxDOT, to replace the existing bridge with an improved structure. Personnel from TxDOT initially discovered the site in the spring of 2011 during the excavation of 14 backhoe trenches. Although evidence of prehistoric cultural activity was uncovered within 6 of the trenches, it was unknown at the time whether such material was in situ within the right-of-way or if it had eroded out of 2 nearby archaeological sites situated just upriver, the Sprague and Upper Sprague sites, and if it had washed downstream to the bridge crossing. Accordingly, archaeologists from Coastal Environments, Inc., or CEI, were asked to conduct additional testing to determine if the cultural remains were in situ and to investigate the site's potential for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. Fieldwork was a multi-team effort involving personnel from CEI, Archeological and Environmental Consultants, LLC, the Center for Big Bend Studies at Sul Ross State University, and Dr. Charles Frederick and his assistant, Brittany Gregory. Most of the fieldwork took place in the fall of 2011, although a brief second phase occurred in September 2013. The first phase of fieldwork included relocating and reopening 3 of TxDOT's previous trenches, shown in light yellow, followed by the excavation of 8 new trenches, shown in blue. Trenches north of the Leon River uncovered a relatively small area containing a Toyah or Toyah-like occupation marked mainly by the presence of Perdiz arrow points and bison and deer bone. These items came from a circa 20 centimeter thick A horizon resting atop what was identified as West Range alluvium, seen here as stratum 7 on this slide. West Range is a Holocene age deposit dating at least as early as 5300 BP and terminating sometime between circa 1000 and 600 BP. Interestingly, a portion of the Toyah zone dipped dramatically downward to the west, where it occurred within laminated deposits of Ford alluvium, a later deposit dating from circa 1000 BP to the present. This so-called deep Toyah zone presumably had been deposited atop the edge of the former bank of the river, but almost all of it had been truncated and removed by subsequent river migration. Only a small segment of the deep Toyah still was present at the western end of Trench 20, mainly within stratum 18, as shown here on this slide. Included within it were additional bison bones, charcoal, ash, fired earth, the latter identified as features 30 and 31, and presumably indicative of hearth-like remains. 2 of the reopened TxDOT trenches and 3 new trenches were located south of the current Leon River on relatively flat terrain sandwiched between today's river and a relic Leon River channel to the south. The latter, in fact, was the active river channel prior to construction of the existing bridge in the early 1950s and the concomitant diversion of the river into its modern course. Trenches south of the channelized river produce several distinct occupation levels within basically the same alluvial stratigraphy. A 30 to 50 centimeter thick A horizon was present in the upper levels of the West Range alluvium across almost the entire area, recognized as stratum 3 in this slide. This A horizon marked the top of what was identified as the upper West Range alluvium. Within it were at least two recognizable late Archaic occupation levels that were marked by artifacts, fire-cracked rocks, and clusters of mussel shells. Additional mussel shells, artifacts, and fire-cracked rocks also were present in the lower, less obvious A horizon that occurred deeper within the West Range alluvium. This A horizon marked the top of what was recognized as the lower West Range alluvium and shown as stratum 4 in this slide. Again, several concentrated areas of mussel shells and fire-cracked rocks were identified. One probable Lang dart point was found in the east wall of Trench 15 within the lower A horizon. No evidence of a late prehistoric occupation similar to that uncovered north of the Modern River was found in any of the southern trenches. Given that two somewhat distinct Toyah-like deposits were present in the northern part of the site, it was decided to excavate two witness columns and a single block excavation in that area. Witness column 1 measured roughly 50 by 50 centimeters and was positioned along the western side of Trench 4/19 in order to acquire data on the main Toyah occupation. Witness column 6, on the other hand, measured about 1 by 1 meter in size and was positioned along the south wall of the western portion of Trench 20. This witness column was designed to investigate the deep Toyah zone and the Hoth-like debris represented by features 30 and 31. The block excavation was placed opposite witness column 1 along the east side of Trench 4/19 and originally consisted of 9 1 by 1 meter units. Soil overlying the Toyah remains was simply shoveled out to within a few centimeters of the A horizon. Unfortunately, disturbances from road construction and/or a drainage ditch running along the east side of the block eliminated excavation of 3 of the easternmost 1 by 1 units. In an effort to sample the Archaic occupations within both the upper and lower West Range A horizons south of the current channelized river, 4 more 50 by 50 centimeter witness columns and 4 block excavations were laid out adjacent to the trenches. Witness column 2 and block 2 were positioned adjacent to the south wall of Trench 17, directly over a mussel shell concentration present within the upper West Range A horizon and identified as feature 16. Witness column 3 and block 3 were positioned along the east wall of Trench 15 near its southern end, where the trench had exposed 2 deep features, a mussel shell concentration, feature 19, near the top of the lower West Range A horizon, and a burned rock concentration, feature 20, within the lower A horizon. While witness column 3 was hand excavated from the site surface to a depth equal to the base of Trench 15, most of the soil overlying feature 19 and block 3 was removed by backhoe in order to expedite the block's controlled hand excavations. As seen here, the mussel shells were located about 10 to 20 centimeters above the burned rock, with a layer of alluvium separating the 2 features. Witness column 4 and block 4 were positioned adjacent to the north wall of Trench 16 above a layer of burned rock, identified as feature 21, present near the base of the upper West Range's A horizon. Witness column 5 was placed along the east wall of reopened Trench 11, above several layers of burned rock visible within the upper A horizon. These layers were thought to represent individual occupation surfaces. Finally, block 5 was placed adjacent to the east wall of Trench 15 above the location of feature 18, a deposit of shell exposed near the base of the trench. As with block 3, a backhoe was utilized to remove most of the soil above the feature, thus allowing hand excavation to commence about 10 centimeters above the shell deposit. As noted, block 1 exposed the easily identifiable A horizon containing material related to the site's Toyah-like occupation. Included were charcoal and bison bone samples submitted for AMS radiocarbon dating. Two of the bison bones were split, with one portion subjected to ultrafiltration prior to AMS dating, and the other part treated by XAD purification prior to AMS dating. In addition, the two hearth-like features in witness column 6 produced a significant amount of charcoal plus a kernel of corn and an Indian breadroot tuber fragment, all of which were submitted for AMS dating. Save for the bison humerus at the bottom of this slide, all of the dates are virtually identical to one another and suggest a relatively late Toyah occupation between circa 505 and 290 calibrated BP, or about AD 1445 to 1660. This is strong evidence that the cultural material found within the deep Toyah of witness column 6 represents remains likely dumped over the edge of the former riverbank by the people responsible for the Toyah-like occupation. Additionally, it can be seen that the XAD purified dates are slightly older and have a smaller standard deviation than the ultra-filtered dates run on the same split bone samples. This supports the notion proposed by others that XAD dates are likely more reliable than ultra-filtered dates. All excavations south of the channelized Leon River were designed to elucidate the archaic occupations present in that area. As noted, witness column 2 and block 2 examine the concentration of mussel shells identified as feature 16 within the upper part of the Upper West Range alluvium. Although the only artifact of note from the two excavations was the tip of an unidentified dot point, one of the mussel shells was submitted for AMS dating and yielded a calibrated 2 sigma range of between 1260 and 1070 BP, or circa AD 690 to 880. If accurate, this suggests an occupation within what John Lose and others have identified as the Late Archaic 4 period in Central Texas. Witness column 3 and block 3 examined features 19 and 20, the overlying mussel shell layer and the underlying burned rock deposit exposed within the Lower West Range alluvium. As can be seen in this slide, the two features appear to be located atop one another within a slight depression. Radiocarbon dates on a mussel shell and organic sediment from feature 19 produced date ranges of 3008 to 2856 calibrated BP and 2770 to 2705 calibrated BP, respectively. Interestingly, the median dates for these two samples are roughly 200 years apart, suggesting that a 200-year correction factor might prove to be a reliable means, at least for this stretch of the Leon River, for one to compensate for ancient carbon absorbed by mussels when creating their shells. Importantly, charcoal from the underlying burned rock cluster yielded a date range of between 2749 and 2686 cal BP, a range that is virtually identical to the range derived from the organic sediment and the overlying shell deposit. Together, the two dates suggest that the burn rocks of feature 20 and the shells of feature 19 were laid down sometime between circa 800 and 735 BC during the Late Archaic 2 period. These dates also provide evidence for the age of the Lang Point, found in the wall of Trench 15 at the same depth a few meters to the north. Witness column 4 and block 4 examined the burn rock layer of feature 21 uncovered along the north side of Trench 16 in the lower portion of the Upper West Range alluvium. Although no charcoal was recovered from the feature, a fragment of possum haw was found in a flotation sample of soil removed from the feature and AMS dated to between 1894 and 1735 calibrated BP, or circa AD 60 to 220 during the Late Archaic 3 period. The medial portion of an untyped dot point also was found immediately beneath the rocks of feature 21. Given the date of the feature, the point is probably an Enser. As can be seen here, The remains of feature 18 of the feature 18 shell deposit were found to cover an area that measured circa 120 centimeters north-south by 70 centimeters east-west. Another smaller shell deposit was uncovered at the same depth to the southeast of feature 18 and identified as feature 28. In an effort to obtain an age on the deposition of features 18 and 28, 2 radiocarbon samples were submitted for AMS dating, one on a tiny piece of organic sediment adhering to the inside of one of the mussel shells from feature 18, and the other on one of the actual mussel shells from the same feature. The sediment sample yielded a 2 sigma age of between 4411 and 4226 cal BP, or circa 2460 to 2275 BC, while the mussel shell produced a 2 sigma range of 4628 to 4432 cal BP, or circa 2680 to 2480 BC. As with the paired shell and organic sediment dates from feature 19, these dates also are about 200 years apart, bolstering the notion that dates on mussel shells are about 200 years older than charcoal and organic soil dates. Perhaps more importantly, however, is the recognition that features 18 and 28 are the 2 earliest features found at the site and represent a Middle Archaic occupation associated with the bottom of the lower West Ranges A horizon. Unfortunately, time does not allow for a detailed discussion concerning the analyses conducted on the vertebrate faunal remains, botanical material, snails, or mussel shells recovered from 41HM61. Anyone interested in those studies can consult the final report on the project, published by TxDOT in 2015, and or a 2017 article in the Plains Anthropologist concerning the snails recovered from the site. Instead, let us examine the overall sequence of site occupation, along with some of the environmental and subsistence changes recognized by the data. The currently recognized occupation sequence at 41HM61 spans the period between circa 4410 and 290 calibrated BP, or roughly from 2460 BC to AD 1660. This is not to say that the site was the scene of one long continuous occupation. Rather, such occupations were represented by intermittent visits that lasted for relatively short periods of time, yet collectively covered thousands of years. The earliest of these visits occurred during the very end of the Middle Archaic period and is represented by the mussel shell deposits of features 18 and 28. Although no diagnostic artifacts were associated, vertebrate remains recovered with the mussel shells included a majority of fish and turtle bones, suggesting a warm season or warm weather time of occupation. No evidence of bison was found, which is in keeping with one of the periods identified by Los and his colleagues during which bison were absent from central Texas. After a gap of circa 1600 years, the site was visited again during the middle part of the Late Archaic II period, roughly between 2770 and 2685 cal BP, or between circa 800 and 735 BC. Based on the radiocarbon dates from apparently contemporaneous features 19 and 20, that's the shell and stacked above the fire-cracked rock deposit, and the presence of the Lang dart point, this occupation can be equated, obviously, with the use of Lang points in Texas. Vertebrate remains associated with features 19 and 20 again suggest a lack of bison, and this again generally agrees with an absence of bison in central Texas prior to about 750 to 700 BC. Although not associated with any features, the next site occupation can be related to the latter portion of the Late Archaic II period and is marked by Marcus dart points and several bison bones recovered from the upper portion of the lower West Range alluvium in several of the backhoe trenches. An XAD purified date on a bison bone recovered from the trenches indicates an occupation between circa 2315 and 2150 cal BP, or between circa 400 and 200 BC. This range equates very well with one of the recognized periods of bison's presence on the southern plains, a period that Los and his colleagues identified as LAB2 as the LAB2 interval shown near the top of this slide. In fact, bison bones comprised about 24% by weight of all vertebrate remains from this assemblage. After another gap of a few hundred years, people who produced answer dark points visited the site during what Los and others have identified as the early part of the Late Archaic III period. The best evidence for this occupation, besides the answer points themselves, comes from the AMS date on the possum haw fragment associated with feature 21, plus an AMS date on organic sediment obtained from one of the living surfaces uncovered in nearby witness column 5, about 5 meters to the west of feature 21. These date the site's answer occupation at between 1895 and 1560 calibrated BP, or between about AD 55 and 390. Two bones of an unidentified very large mammal were present in the assemblage, but it is unknown if they were bison or from another large creature such as a bear. Another occupation associated with the latter part of the Late Archaic III period comes from two dated deer bones recovered from the upper West Range alluvium exposed in reopened TxDOT Trench 11. These yielded dates of between 1520 and 1365 cal BP, or roughly between AD 430 and 585. No diagnostic artifacts related to this occupation were found, but the date range suggests an occupation associated with the Frio point type. No evidence of bison was present. The final occupation, recognized at 41 HM61, equates to the Late Archaic IV period and is represented by the mussel shells of feature 16 and the associated shell date of between circa 1260 and 1070 cal BP, or between AD 690 and 880. Again, no diagnostic artifacts were associated with this occupation, but its age suggests a time range equal to Dahl dark points. Toyah material found north of the river represents the last occupation at the site. As noted, 10 dates were obtained on bison bone, charcoal, and floral remains from this occupation, and all span the period between circa 505 and 290 cal BP, or between AD 1445 and 1660. This suggests a late Toyah occupation that relates to the second of two periods during which bison were heavily exploited by Toyah folks. As shown in this slide, the first period of Toyah bison exploitation, which was not present at HM61, occurred during early Toyah times between circa 650 and 530 BP, or from about AD 1300 to 1420. Interestingly, the late Toyah vertebrate assemblage included two deer or pronghorn fawns, only a few months old, suggesting some site visits during the warmer months. This despite the major presence of bison at circa 91% of all Toyah bone weight, and an occupation during what has come to be known as the Little Ice Age. Overall, the geomorphological character of the Leon River in central Texas indicates that ancient occupation surfaces were buried rapidly and frequently under low energy conditions. Thus, sites such as 41 HM61 can contain a fairly complete record of human presence in the region going back thousands of years, albeit a record that with relatively low visibility that requires a significant amount of effort to both locate and interpret. Thank you.